Testing one, two. We'll start in 2 minutes. Hi, Dan. Welcome to the party. Very nice. Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone who showed up tonight and came last week. I hope it's something you're enjoying. Again, my name's Joe Van Wee. I am an alcoholic, also a drug addict, and I work at Avenues. Tonight, we're doing step 3. Last week, we discussed steps 1 and 2 pretty universally, from its origins from Alcoholics Anonymous, what they would look like procedurally to work them, what they could mean in NA, and how they're rooted in other recovery communities, Dharma, refuge recovery, how they kind of present themselves in cognitive behavioral therapy, and why 12-step life is so effective to combat addiction, the addictive mind, especially when your mind's sober, you've been stabilized. So we talked about steps 1 and 2, and 2 having this premise. Just to review, first off, let me dial back. This isn't an AA meeting of any kind, or it's just kind of an alumni discussion that I'll open up the last half hour or two of discussing the steps and how to practice them. I try to depart from a fundamentalist approach, even if that's something you enjoy. There's no issue there. This is kind of a wide entrance as the steps becoming a daily practice. So that's kind of my approach. I try to do it dispassionately, so I don't set the room on fire in that degree, but I like to explore what these ideas mean just for a little context and background. I'll always give. I've been sober I had 3 periods of sobriety within my life. At one point, I was 16 to 21, I was sober. And at 24, for the next 14 years of my life, I was sober. And then I had a nightmarish relapse that brought my life to a total collapse, my health, finances, professionalism, dignity, and recovered from there. Each time I did work the steps, and each time it felt completely different. Procedures kind of the same, but I know the awakening was different, and what I needed to do to maintain an awakening, I speak to tonight of how I work the steps now. My disillusionment with AA was written all over my face, even within the paradox of being desperate and having nowhere to get sober. This was the only game in town left. I've exhausted how many treatment centers or which types to go to, um, and so approaching the steps with that in my mind. That's my story. And going through step 2, realizing I'm insane to the degree that I don't know what I'm gonna use, living in that paradox. I don't wanna drink. I don't wanna use drugs, but I feel I have to, at least for that day. I'll get sober tomorrow, or when late stage addiction takes over. So, I'm speaking from a point of view that would bring the idea, even if you think you've worked the steps before, there is no harm in having the desperation to do it one more time. And why I say that, it's just not cliche. It's because it's what happened to me at the step we're talking about tonight, step 3. Um, so I have this concession that I'm insane in this very specific way that you admit to in a 12-step community, that you have mental blank spots. And AA uses two prime examples and more about alcoholism, Jim and Fred. NA cites examples and patterns of thinking, the problems now within my personality, and these scenarios and these crises, which they give indication to. Jim had a resentment against his boss. Of course he did. He used to own the car lot, and only an alcoholic would put himself in the grueling position to work there in the first 3 months of sobriety, thinking it was probably some kind of humbling act, or he would take the car lot over again. You let your imagination kind of create that scenario, but that was the prior condition to him in his cognitive mind before, thinking whiskey would be safe to drink if he mixed it with milk, which sounds insane. It doesn't to me, because it from that idea, there was relief. It would be safe to in that diner that day to get relief from the torment, which was his life. His life seemed like, I don't know, nightmarish to some degree, and he could not admit that to himself. His ego could not that to himself. So, step 3, we're taking this pivot, admitting that that insanity exists, this delusion of life. The way I edit it in my head is killing me when I'm sober. It's not letting me to connect with people in any meaningful way, and people having the experience that they've met their first friends in Alcoholics Anonymous is because it might be the truth. Because if you begin to let people know exactly who you are, if you can have that experience in the fellowship. So, step 2 for me was grueling. Intellectually, I knew I was an addict and an alcoholic. Intellectually, I thought I knew the solution to some degree. I understood the big book fairly well, but there was this cognitive disconnect, especially when it came to terms of spirituality, the word God, this confirmation bias, this lens that was in my head was so apparent and becoming so toxic. Even if I would say I wanted to remain an atheist and go through the steps, it was so toxic. I was running out of time. I was gonna die. So I was fortunate. The guy who procedurally took me through the third step was very patient. He was very fundamentalist AA. He didn't really give editorial. He didn't debate me when it came down to step 2 and I wanted to move on. That was a disappointment to some degree. Morbidly, I wanted to show him how witty I was. He did not care. He just wanted me not to die of alcoholism. So that was that was a miracle, in the most sensible way to view miracles. So when we got to the third step in Alcoholics Anonymous, it looks like chapter 5. It's about 4 pages. After completing reading the steps and how it works and how we ended last week, you say this prayer to confirm you're completing step 2. We read it at every meeting, and the prayer is we ask for protection and care with complete abandon. And so we abandon ourselves to the God that you may be faithful to. If you're like me and plenty others of the agnostic or atheistic temperament, and this is important because this is AA's position in their book. You can read it. I mean, they dedicate a whole chapter to this mindset. That's a lot of real estate in the book when the text is defined by the first 164 pages. Why would they do that? Well, it's kind of a wink. Even the faithful are of the agnostic temperament. There is something about the existing faith of you and me being of the position of an atheist that we're in the same boat because we are dying of addiction. What is that? That means we can fit under the same tent. And that chapter opens the possibility if I'm willing to believe I'm wrong, I might be willing to see my ego and that there's the enemy. This is the fantasy life has taken too much time. It's not let me have it had me see my authentic self in years. We spoke about the third step today, and I think of an alcoholic of my type, just to understand what they're about to talk about. Ego, this internal dialogue with me, this fantasy life where I could peacock to defend myself. The ego, was played a very important part of my young life and adolescent life. It saved me from what I interpreted as pain or torment or not knowing how to socialize or feeling detachment or not belonging. I think on an average human, healthy human being, by the age of 8, you feel a sense of sovereignty. You're an independent human being. Well, with me, I believe my ego was far more interesting and developed than I could develop an authentic personality I could present to other people. And so that's prime. It's prime for addiction. By the time I drank and used drugs, a love affair started where they were both, if I want to personify these ideas, it's my personality and addiction. We're telling each other, well, we're reality. This is where you're safe. Step 3 is confronting this, and they confront it with a word called selfishness. So AA, if you believe the tenets after how it works, A, B, and C, I am alcoholic. I cannot get sober by myself. I've exhausted every measure I care to look towards of getting sober. I've made a home in a 12-step community. And I'm not saying that's the only path for people. I'm not fanatical in that sense. I've been alive too long. I've seen too many people get sober. So I just wanted to put that out there. So I believe these tenets, and I believe that no human power could relieve me of alcoholism. And if you're secular, you broaden that. Don't pigeonhole yourself. A's 2 things. It's a book that was written in 1938 about addiction, and the other part of AA is a community, which really has no rules and runs on these 12 traditions that they just expect us to all behave with. But give yourself some wiggle room to keep moving. Be brave in that respect, and find someone you're comfortable with to work the step. This is the first time you're taking an action with another alcoholic or another addict in the room. NA, you're already doing that process with packets. But I believe these tenets, and I move forward, and the book stops talking about drinking. It starts talking about this illusion of self and why it's an illusion. It's dynamic. This illusion. It's illusion because it's not what you're presenting to other people. There's a dialogue going on in your head, in most people's heads, your whole life. Who are you talking to? When I say, Joe, damn it, you did it again. Which Joe am I addressing? Like if I say this out loud long enough, I would be I would be scary to people. I would look insane. But if I do it just in my mind, what is that restraint? But there's an insanity to this because there's a conflict. Even when I'm generous, it's starting to say, is there an intention of Joe? Does this pay Joe? Am I charitable? They describe this actor, oh, just trying to control the whole show. He wants to be the actor, but he has to be directed by himself. And of course, he'll do the lighting, makeup too. Is this not really kind of what's going on in our mind? That space in our mind, is the problem definitely happening when we're sober? It's obvious DUIs are problems, foreclosures are problems, the loss of children are problems, debt, not having meaning and depression, maybe from the loss of a career, the collapse of a financial life because of addiction. These are obvious problems and they need to be solved. And most of us need help doing that. But this is not what's happening in step three. You're confronting an existential problem because this is where a spiritual awakening can happen. Without that, there's not a personality change. So they're saying selfishness, selfishness. So AA breaks. I'm just gonna go to this. Share my screen real quick. Bang. Oh, no, add to stream. There we are. Resentment, selfishness, fear, and dishonesty. A starts using this lexicon. Let's break down like these four ideas that addiction represents in the personality. Now they're saying not all of us, we're not always selfish. We could be generous, very kind people. Some of us are very courageous. But we're talking about this baseline of anxiety. Dishonesty comes from living in fear. Dishonesty is from the ego. These ideas. So we're starting to toy around with these ideas. The first one, step three, wants to confront is selfishness. This is the character defect we're going to look at. I have to go to the page to do that. Is that moving? Okay, it moved. So the idea that we're turning our will over, that frightened me. I mean, I became kind of a secular, hardened atheist. I was riddled with depression, anxiety. My life was in collapse. And now I'm going to turn my will over to the care of God. I didn't believe in God. This was very difficult, but I did want to be sober. Was I being combative? I didn't feel that way. My idea of God was trapped. The word caused too much pain and disillusionment in me that I was tripped up by the word. I was really lucky. I had a compassionate, patient sponsor that walked me through this where my intellect didn't ruin it, if that makes sense. And what will am I surrendering? Let's think. We've already confessed. Where is my free will at this point? I am compromised. I can't stop using drugs every day. I finally got stabilized. Now I can't stop having anxiety. I have little moments of hope, but man, my life's in collapse. I'm in serious debt. Um, I have tremendous anxiety. The news is very depressing, no matter what continent I'm reading about. I've never had a bright outlook about life since I went to Terminator 2 at 13. I was just waiting for this scenario to be a reality. Um, I had an unmeasured mind. There was no restraint. So, what will did I have? What will am I speaking of? I could barely get through a day. I'd be so exhausted, I'd have to take a nap midday because I was just overwhelmed with how out of control my brain was. So, I'm obviously open to surrendering my will, but it's not to a God I don't believe in. It was into an idea that I could be wrong about everything. How did I let my life become so limited to an addiction I thought I knew so well? And here I am in collapse again. So when I got to step three, and it's suggesting this prayer to confront the idea of selfishness, that of myself, I'm not going to fix this problem. And I was of that nature. I agreed with my sponsor, 12-step life was going to be for me. I didn't know what it was going to look like this time. And I got on my knees just because I'm from Scranton and AA. I was very uncomfortable. I wanted to be sober, but that was very awkward for me. I said the prayer. It wasn't like pick a God, any God. I had this idea when I left there that I could be completely wrong, kind of like a Neo situation. Am I in the Matrix? How did life become this hard for me? Did I let this happen? Am I really ill? It started to melt the idea that what happened to me. What's happening is an awakening that is disenchanted. It's a word that I think it's used too much. It means I wasn't under the spell that AA was magic. I've been around it too long. But what I was under the spell of is that I knew what sobriety would look like for me, and I did not. This curiosity started to grow in me that I could be wrong, and maybe I could be happy, or maybe I didn't have to be terrified of being in pain. Maybe I could make these amends. Maybe I'm going to tell my sponsor the real truth about not only my finances, which I'm completely embarrassed about, but those harms that I didn't want to talk about. I started to get this peppering that if I could say that prayer and humble myself to join Alcoholics Anonymous with a real commitment, maybe there's more things I could explore and humble myself. I didn't feel like it was a betrayal to myself. And from there, a spiritual life really started to grow in me. Um, but one thing I want to mention real quick is that at that point, I was lucky. My sponsor did something. It's a little out of procedure, but I'm at step 3. I'm going to meetings. I'm reconnected. I'm calling people every day. I did some procedural kind of ceremony of the 3rd step with another man, or you could do it however you do in your region. But he said, go to page 86 in the big book. And that's going to be part of your homework today if you're enjoying this and want to have fun. And I'm going to do it with you. I try to do it every night. On average, I do it about 5 nights a week. And what it is some rehabs call it step 10. But the big book is kind of addressing it as step 11. That might have been just a mistake that took hold in the 80s of the rise of great treatment. But the top of 86, when we retire at night, this is a daily practice. A is a daily discipline. It's a daily practice of ways to review your life. And I never treated that way in the 14 years I was sober. And I guess I'm just a guy, if I'm going to be committed to a membership of AA, I'm going to follow the disciplines for the better of myself. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Do we owe an apology? Have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? Were we kind and loving toward all? What could we have done better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time? Or were we thinking, what can we do for others? Or what we can pack into the stream of life? But be careful. Do not drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection. You have to be curious about yourself. Even when you make mistakes, I started to get a little more forgiving of myself. Not like just sticking my head in the sand and casting something off to the side, but curious, why am I doing that? I don't want to do that anymore. Why can't I just will that away? And this is the idea of will. And I wanted to surrender to the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wanted to explore the idea, what kind of spirituality can Joe have? But we're going to be careful not to make it morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness or inquire what corrective measures should be taken. Then when we wake up every morning, page 86, we ask God to direct, or a higher truth to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. So under that conditions, they're saying we could use our intellect. My sponsor, and I took him serious. I did not want to. I did not want to fail, and I didn't want to fail because I didn't do my best to follow the steps in a new and meaningful way, and I knew them. I did that every night so I didn't start new fires before I started taking this inventory of myself. That was my commitment at third step 3. I could do that every night. I'm going to keep this book at my bed. And then every morning I could ask, can I remove my mind from self-pity? I took the third step. No magic happened in any sense, but what happened was a growing hope that I was going to change the entire way I live. It started to grow on me. And how you work a really good third step is it's by one earmark that it's complete. It's that you write a fourth step. And there's people here last week to the degree we're going to talk about that next week. I'm not a fundamentalist in the you got to write it this exact way. Just get it done, one at a time, all of them. What is your sponsor comfortable with? Well, how did he do it? Let's start. If you feel you did a step 3, because to my experience being around Alcoholics Anonymous since 1994, if you work step 3 long enough, one of 3 things happens: A, you drink; B, you work the fourth step; or C, the fellowship is just enough for you, and that's fine. That's the type of alcoholic you are. I've seen it work. Um, you don't have you may or may not have a full awakening. I want it to be awake. I want it to not only be relieved of daily use, I want it to make amends, and I want my life to mean something. I wanted a purpose I couldn't see. That was my commitment in step 3. Um, I try to keep it that broad and universal because it can be. I don't like to define God to the guy I'm taking the steps with, or let them talk about it. But there's something about that ceremony, doing it with another person. They also give you an exit if you're not comfortable. You could do it by yourself. But the whole point is, can I prepare my mind to see where is my ego? And that practicing steps 10 or call it 11, whatever you want. If you practice that every night going into your fourth step, you're confronting where you begin and your ego ends. Like they start and finish. You could start, it's like Venom, like the comic book. You're going to have to start peeling them apart. Because I want to review this ego, and it could feel uncomfortable and embarrassing. Um, by this time, I might have made friends in NA or AA that could support me while I start writing this stuff, because I don't want to live in any more lies. I definitely don't want to use. And I need more help than just my will. So I think we covered most of it. It's 8:27 in the PM. And I'm going to now just kind of field questions from the chat box. So remove that. Let's go up and see if there's any. There's someone heard a party was here. Hello, everyone. Holly Campbell. Good evening, Joe. Hi. So does anyone have any questions about steps 1, 2, or 3? You could put them in the chat and I could answer them. If you're not comfortable doing a question that way too, you could always. Joe, can you explain step 3, what it looks like in practice? Yeah, so practice, there's the formal one, like the practice steps, some are 10, 11, and 12. Step 3 is this moment where I commit to living the lifestyle of examining myself as the problem in step 4. So in practice for the first time, if you're part of AA, it's understanding maybe the first 5 chapters, if someone can help you do that. And you're making this decision to not only be in it in this community, but I'm going to finish working the steps to that degree the first time. In practice, there's a prayer traditionally and historically. You say the prayer, and it's, God, I offer myself to thee to do with me as you will. You're surrendering this idea that I'm in charge, and that I'm open to this adventure now, that I'm tired of my desires and my will ruining everything. Um, Relieve from me the bondage of self, the self we just defined, the self, the operator, the ego, self-centered person. It's about Joe feeling good. Everyone else is just extras in my life. Relieve me of the bondage of self so I can better do thy will. In the first 4 chapters, the will, God's will isn't a mystery in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not scriptural. It's you need to help other people. You have to be of use of other people. It's not a mysterious thing. Everything else in your life is going to be up to you and how you could, but it has to meet the degree. Where do I best fit in helping other people? Um, and victory over my problems can bear witness to those I could help. So I'm going to solve these problems. And God or the AA, if you're going to help me solve these problems, because I'm going to be useful to some, because I'm going to pay the debt helping someone else. I might get this chance. So it's really interesting in the practice of you're surrendering the idea. You're exhausted by self and ego, and you say this prayer. You could say it by yourself with someone that understands. You could say a different prayer. I didn't say I said that prayer because it was easy. It was AA, and now here I am. Still, if you asked me, I would have said, I'm an atheist and I'm still in AA. I'm desperate and I want help. And I did the third step prayer in his garage. I found a prayer, and I grew up Catholic. It was the prayer of Saint Francis. I said that every day before I started writing step 4, and that prayer was all the ideals I wanted if I was going to have a chance at living a couple more years or a life after that. It was to bring love where there's hate. Can I seek to understand people before I need to be understood? That prayer made sense to me, and I said that every day, and it started to prepare me to write the truth and really tell someone my whole story. And that was the practice of step 3: finding your ego, giving up self, getting ready to write the truth about your life. Would you say you found a oh, I forgot you could click. Would you say you found a balance with your ego rather than exercising it completely? Yeah, I it's a crafty game. I don't know. Um, ego it's it's there. It's whispering all the time to me. My inadequacies. It starts. My fears will flare up somewhere. Um, a dialogue happens in my head, and then the Joe that wants to overcompensate starts to show up. The definition of me, my ego shows up. This selfish life. While I was working step 3, it was my sponsor always would ask, are you thinking of yourself or your ego? Are you picking all the movies? How's your Netflix etiquette? I'm married and I'm a dangerous person to watch TV with because I will make you an extension of my will. We're navigating through Amazon Prime. That was the first exercise of restraint. My ego was kind of devastated because I felt like I really seriously, I live in Scranton, a small town. I felt like I lost a sense of my pride and dignity. My business collapsed. It had my name on it. That was a beautiful thing that happened to me because it took me 7 to 10 months to come to terms with that. Everyone else knew it before I could admit it and talk about it openly. I was so embarrassed of did I have an addiction or am I a failure? Um, the ego of that nature got restrained, I guess, in the ninth step. My daily practice of step 11 is to keep my ego in check, my conscious contact with the ideas I'm exploring for spirituality, working with newcomers. In step 10, my wife, keep my ego in check. There's no kind of champagne party after tonight. I'll probably have to wash dishes after answering questions. So yeah, it's a constant battle. It's I I'm always open to know I'm wrong, especially when I'm sober. The steps are there as a guideline for a better life. Step 3 is as individuals making a better decision to surrender. Al Bruce. Sure. Thanks, Al. Surrender is power, not weakness. Yeah, that's the paradox of what we're achieving in these first three steps. Is power has been asleep. Um, I like AA geo targets where you're going to find God in these first 5 chapters, which is pretty lofty and profound, but it's simple. We found that most of us found this great reality deep down within us. And what happens is I do find that. I found it with my sponsor because I was honest with them. This exchange of truth, um, through the functionality of the steps. Um, I surrendered that I've been a fraud. My ego has failed me. My addiction is running my life because it's just too painful for a conscious person to be in charge of my life. I need to be high. I've admitted that. Step three's let me jump off at this point that I don't want to live this way. I want to be part of the pack. Joe, can yeah, yeah. Joe, can you talk more about the balance of surrendering yourself and having goals in life? Yeah, absolutely. Because it's just it was a problem for me. Um, it was a problem professionally. It was a problem spiritually. I was 40 and my life collapsed, and now I'm surrendering. I'm starting to have an awakening. I'm starting to feel a spirit wake up in me, a soul, an empathy, a daily meditation practice to find things of irony and spirituality interesting and truths that I've ignored for years. My icy heart was melting. But what happens? I mean, I've heard other people speak to this. What I'm left with, there's this in between space where I feel like I have the morals, ideals that I did when I was 17, but I am not 17. This adolescence kind of spirituality kind of bubbled up in me. And why and say I'm disenchanted? Because it's a great word. I'm not under a spell that can make me do irrational things. And the book warns against this. We've also seen people do things in the idea of spirituality, misguided, that could be disastrous. There's an in between space. I feel that I relate to other people that are talking about this. That I now take this spirituality, this rebirth. I have to be an adult with it. And my goals, I like doing a lot of things. I could handle pressure. Um, I could handle complex things. I have a background in doing that. How do I do that now in the spirit of help and do it with integrity? I do it very openly. My life's pretty transparent. My family obligations can allow for that. My wife that allows me to do that. I'm a social kind of creature, but I'm not an intimate person. My intimacy and commitment to that comes through the steps. My goals in life, my ambition is woken back up with the permission that it's helpful to other people, and I do no harm with my ambition. I am not ruthless in my ambition because the steps, if you practice them, they won't allow for it. But you have to be, you have to live to the demands that and the abilities you have. I'm starting to wake up to that now. That's thank you for that, Akiva. Yeah, ambitions are tough. Ambitions are exciting. Uh, I just, if this is helpful, I was sober 14 years at 24. Um, you know, I was a kid that till fourth grade, I grew up kind of in a rough, impoverished area of projects, but I went to private schools, so I had this duality about me, and drinking relieved that. Then I finally get sober. I'm sober at 24. My ambition was a wildfire, and it was a good thing. I was encouraged, especially about by the people that were in my support group, and I designed a life out of my ambition, I built a business. I made films. These things were never supposed to be possible to, someone who's compromised in mental health or an addiction. And um, it worked out. But what happened was my ego, this slipping in of it was about me and me. I created a persona that I thought was safe to do. I knew the difference. I was doing it for over a decade. It got really hard. And then I started taking shortcuts because I didn't want to lose things. That's how my ego got me. But I think ambition's a beautiful thing. I think you having talents and abilities and struggling in life is beautiful. I don't think sobriety is about being safe and peaceful at all moments. If especially if you're young in sobriety, it's hard to speak to that a lot of times. If your youth is still intact and you've recovered, um, I, I think it's your obligation to take risk with your ambition in the lines that is it helpful to other people? Is it true creativity? Am I creating a service? Am I taking care of my family? These things you come up with as you practice step 11. And, and so I think it's interesting to always talk about it. It is in the context when it was written in 1938. I think what was in most people's heads that read it throughout the decades was a Christian Judeo God. But a lot of them kept that really open for that idea. I want to read something real quick. If anyone ever heard of Gabor Mate, master clinician, had an addictions clinic in Toronto. Um, he's a research clinician in trauma, bestseller. He writes a book, and it's titled "In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts: Close Encounters with Addiction." And I really like his outside perspective of loving the service that a man dedicated his life to service to helping people that suffer from our affliction. And he's writing his understanding of step three. Um, and he grew up with pretty intense trauma. Three, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. The word God could have a religious meaning for many people. For many others, it means laying trust in the universal truths and higher values that reside at the spiritual core of human beings, but are feared and resisted by the grasping, anxious, past conditioned ego. Um, unpacking that, what are the core values of human beings? To have homeostasis, peace, love, flourishment, offspring. To do this, morality serves evolution, like living by principles. Um, the ego doesn't allow for that. Ego makes me a lone wolf. I am the only one knowing what's going on, the full truth, and I'm barely letting that person talk in my head, or the house of cards will fail. And the only thing that could keep this structure up, and this comes from deep trauma, pain, detachment, is my addiction. My addiction could have a love affair with that, the same as my ADD does. Doesn't let me be present because of the pain of being present. Um, I'm confronting this at step three, making a commitment. I'm going to trust faith. We call the same word for trust in Latin. I'm going to trust the guy or girl in front of me to guide me through the rest of these steps because I'm going to live this way. I'm not going to be afraid of who I am. And that's the principles that I want to carry me through. Joe, can you talk alternatives to God? You'll have to ask God, Megan. um, yeah, it's a large word, and for some, it makes complete sense. And I think those people will have to always be tolerant. For the people, it doesn't, because they're not attacking your God. Alternatives to God, like they offer them in the big book. I relate to Bill Wilson to a great degree. The word God, I bristled with antagonism. He writes of the ideas of a czar of a heaven shut my mind off. I could go for a creative intelligence. This is 1938. This man's speaking. That's pretty, provocative, progressive. Can you imagine if this movement, this fellowship was written today? How would that read? How would this book got published if Hank P, an atheist who brought AA to San Francisco, didn't help him and they didn't tolerate each other publishing this? Our history is a little more dynamic than the print of it, how it got done, but we all fit under the same tent. There isn't a truth to how painful reality is for addicts. This trauma, this disappointment. So finding God could be, finding a group. They always say a power greater than yourselves. Mathematically, that's just, it could be binary. Three people that you trust, this relationship strong, that begins a spiritual journey because you're letting someone finally know who you are. Ego, insecure. Mark. Mark, are you reading my mind? Are you living in that talk? Thanks, Mark. Um, yeah, so alternatives to God, that's the journey. That's the exploration. So if you're faithful or not faithful, at step 3, we're both of that inclination deciding we want to find truth. I don't want to live by my ego. It's already agreed upon that I want to be sober, but I don't want to live in this fraud. I can't protect myself this way anymore. I want to be a sincere and authentic person. I want to confront the person I definitely don't want to be. God consciousness, yeah, it's the surrender, it's the collapse of ego, egocentric. So think of Bill Wilson in the history of that under severe belladonna treatment at Towns Hospital. His ego collapsed. He had a white light experience, high powered hallucinogenic. Well, it has hallucinogenic effects. It's nightshade. It's not another concoction with it. Brutal kind of process. But what happens when the high dosages he took is that your default system that it gives you your sense and your cerebral cortex, your sense of self, gets muted, and it allows your brain, other parts of your brain, your visual cortex, auditory, to speak to each other. There's this unification happening in your brain of communication. The ego is dropped off. That's why you have this feeling of oneness. I think God consciousness, that's the pharmaceutical kind of approach that happened to him that opened him up to live the steps. But I think God consciousness is that collapse of the ego. This authentic self is being explored. And this empathy is just growing in you because maybe people are just as scared, or the people that have hurt you have been hurt just as badly. It opens up a whole new paradigm that makes life interesting again. So yeah, God consciousness is that contact, and the contact can only come. These first 3 steps are requiring 3 things. You show up, you can't show up empty-handed. You have to have an open mind. You have to have willingness and honesty. And at step 3, you have all 3. You're open-minded. I'm not threatened by other people's beliefs. I'm going to explore my own. Even in AA, you're going to have to build some tolerance and be part of the community, listen to other people's ideas, even if you don't agree. But I do agree on the steps. We're going to go through the steps together. I have a willingness to at least show up to meetings, show up on time, call people, ask them how they're doing now. I'm not in this total crisis. I could be uncomfortable. I'm getting used to talking to people without having my sobriety collapsing. And now I'm making a commitment that my ego it can't be real. I have to tell someone what my ego is, and I'm going to do it in the form of describing it through resentment, dishonesty, and fear of the other character defects. I'm going to write them down. So, I mean, that's part of the homework I wanted you guys to do today was if you're in AA, go to a meeting, NA, the like, refuge, or somewhere else. Find a very petty resentment, someone that annoys you, that kind of sets off your cynic, or you just don't like the way they operate at a meeting. Just a petty resentment, nothing huge, no big ones. If you're a family member, someone that might have annoyed you this week at work, whatever it is, something small. It could be a stranger, and bring that person's name in your head next week in a pen and a paper for sure. Because after admitting that the self is out of control, in the third step, we're going to take this idea and start really attacking these patterns that have been happening in my head. So we can see, pardon me. So I think this is where you take the first action. In AA, it's the real commitment because I'm going to separate me wanting to thinking that I'm my thoughts, which up to this point in sobriety or out of sobriety might have seemed nightmarish of what I think about myself, or it's really unmeasured and delusional. And now I'm going to write down the truth and have a discussion. And there's some easy ways to write this. It doesn't have to be. We could do a piecemeal, and I like doing it with a petty resentment because let's see where we're going with this before you tackle mom, dad, the ex, betrayal, firings, bosses. These things sting. It could feel like you're blindfolded and you're running through all these emotions that someone put a blindfold on you. Let's do it with a petty resentment, and then we could see what the experience of a fifth step would look like, how to look for someone you trust. And six and seven, what meditation could look like for you, what others practice. Um, what does being selfish look like for you now that you're in recovery? Um, I had things I struggle with now that I'm in recovery is the considerate. I'm married life. Um, the considerations of my wife and child and time, even when I have time to do things that I've always thought were interesting and they're not harmful to anyone. They're taking away from the home considerations I never had before. Being a bachelor and pretty self-centered guy, that was excusable to some degree, but not anymore. And it's too painful for me to live that way. I'm still an active smoker. That looks selfish. I can feel it. I haven't confronted that addiction. Um, so that feels selfish to me because of what it's saying to what I think about my own future in front of my wife. She doesn't smoke. She's kind of real healthy, a health person. Um, so these are things I'm still coming to terms with. I'm open about them. Um, it's being selfish, things I'm not aware of. I'm used to the pain of those things being discovered. It does dissipate when you're honest, or I could admit to them. Talk to my sponsor, friends. When I'm doing something, gross, obscene, or have offended people, I want to make it right away. Um, I don't want to jeopardize my baseline sobriety, and I don't want to hurt people. Mm, we got 6 minutes left. We could spend it in meditation. Where is your ego? There it is. Um, Ram Dass, he talks about talks about his ego. The fact that I'm talking about Ram Dass at 43 is the fact that the steps of miracles are happening in my mind that I would explore these things. But he's a meditative teacher. He had a transformation. He changed his name. He still had his American name. I forget what his American name was, but let's just for the sake of this story, let's say it was Dan. He's teaching now, hundreds and hundreds of people meditation, and he's Ram Dass. He's enlightened. He's in this enlightenment, and he's about to teach. He opens his eyes. He sees the room filling up, and he said that's when his ego, and his name was Dan, woke up, and he started counting people. How many people are in this room? So I always thought that was funny. He's Ram Dass, but we're our egos are all still alive. Our selfishness, to the fraction of that degree, to the degree I go to a meeting and I get this anxiety to share because I understand that topic. I know how to talk about that really well, and I'm thinking about it so much. I'm missing that someone's in excruciating pain in front of me, and I've been sober long enough. I should be looking for that, and asking if that person needs to talk to me after the meeting, or not being witty or telling jokes. So it shows up at any point, and it could be out of a good circumstance, but it's me thinking about me. Um, Working the steps of 10, 11, and 12 in a new way allows me to look, where am I present? What am I aware of? What's going on outside of me? Am I present? Can I see other people's pain and not be terrified of being uncomfortable about it? So that's a good practice when you go to meetings. If there's someone here I should be paying attention to. Well, we're kind of we're at the hour. Um, does anyone have any other questions? If someone wants to ask me a question, I'm gonna put my email in there throughout the week. And then come Irish Gene. Gene Reed, yeah. Yeah. Edging God out. My ego comes in and God starts going out. So that's the truth. Even like for the understanding I have, I'm giving up the higher order of my ego. I'm going to be in charge. Um, so guys, I am going to put my email. Please, next week, if you feel like popping in, I'd be flattered. We're going to write some resentments and fears, and flush out these ideas as step 4. Um, I write them pretty long format. I'll show you what I do, but I'll show you other alternatives. From NA, I'm not fanatical. There's only one road to the 4th step. I'll show you how I wrote them, how my sponsors showed me how to write them directly from AA, which I'm comfortable with. That's me. But NA has a great workbook. Hazelton, Russell Brand has a great, very simple approach in the back of his book that I feel is an easy entrance. But maybe just to flesh it out, we'll talk about how original people wrote it and how I was taught, and let's see what we could do with a petty resentment and take it up to step 12. And that's how we'll go through the steps with your petty resentment. So find someone that kind of annoys you this week and bring that name next week. My email, guys, if you need it. You can email me anytime, any questions. If you're taking someone through the steps, or you're about to, or you're about to work them and you have any questions, if I could be helpful, I'll try to answer you within the week, for sure. And any support I could give. If I don't know the answer, I'll try to look it up for you. That's my email. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. again, I could always teach the steps better than I'm always practicing them. I'm practicing them the same way that you're trying yourselves. So I like this format. Half hour, we'll throw it out there. There's nothing you can't ask or criticize. This is a place to flush it out instead of doing it by yourself in your head. We could talk about it here. I like this format too for alumni because this allows us to kind of rededicate asking questions because meetings don't always have that format that it would be a safe place to ask a question. It could be uncomfortable or you don't want the full attention of the hour going on you and you have some mundane procedural question. Maybe, or you don't have a sponsor yet or a friend to ask. Please let people know they could come here and they could ask anything openly. I'm not going to criticize. We're not going to bird dog people down or browbeat them. This is just to openly discuss how we can all practice the steps in a way that's comfortable for us and help other people. All right, guys. I'll leave my email up there for a minute. I'm gonna take a sip of water, and if there's no more questions, oh, you're on step 4. Maybe I shouldn't leave it up there too long. I think this video stays up there. I'll be flooded with Ukrainian emails. Hold on. Thanks, Al. Thanks, Justin. Thank you, guys. Step 4, great. Yeah. Anyone's on step 4? Yeah, let's cover that next week. It'll be fun to write it down. I'm gonna wrap it up from here, guys. I hope you guys have a great week. You guys need anything? Send me an email. Peace.